Thank you, Miss Beth, and thank you to all of our children. And aren't you glad to be part of a church that has children? I know I'm glad they are not all mine. This past Tuesday, I had to go get an MRI. I've been having some neck issues and some lower back stuff, and anyway, been through physical therapy to be able to get the MRIs, and so I had to go and get an MRI. Anyway, if you've never had one of those, an MRI is, it's a big, imagine a big gigantic donut with a table that goes into it. And I was thinking, that doesn't sound so bad, does it? Anyway, but imagine this big, gigantic donut-looking thing that you lay on this table that's mechanically controlled that inches you into this device. And once in this device, and of course it stands for magnetic resonance imaging, and so it's not X-ray, but this apparently inside there's these magnets that are spinning around so fast. And I don't know really what's going on, but I know a couple of things are true. One, it's really loud, and if you've ever had one, and it makes such strange knocking noises, and there's nothing sound-wise I've ever experienced quite like that. And this was, I guess, my third or fourth MRI, but the fact that I was having to have neck and lumbar done, that meant there was 2 studies, and each of those studies is about 30 minutes. So I'm going to spend an hour in this machine. And so they get you to lay down on the table, and once they do that, they give you some earplugs because it is loud, and they ask you if you're okay in tight spaces. And I've been in, like I said, I've been in this and through this before repeatedly, and so I was like, no, I'm okay with this. And so then they go ahead and start it. And so once you go into the machine, the first thought that you have, if you're like me, is I wish I was skinnier. And so once you're in there, you realize just how confined and cramped it is. And even though I had said to them, I'm okay, and I don't have claustrophobia, and I'm okay in cramped spaces, it is really, really cramped. And so, for example, if you're laying there, you can't, like if your nose itches, that's about all you can do, because, I mean, sincerely, that machine is just right above your face. And so I get in there, and I'm thinking, actually, I'm beginning to rethink maybe their question, where they said, are you okay in cramped spaces? I'm starting to think, I think I'm okay. I think I'm okay. And so then at this point, I start to have a silent conversation with myself. You ever have those? And when I'm doing this, I'm saying things like, Michael, this is okay. It's not going to get any more confined than it is. It's not actually touching you. It's not actually squeezing in on you. It's actually not confining you. You can breathe, close your eyes, breathe, and it'll be okay. If you'd like me to come to your MRI, I will help you as well. But anyway, so I'm saying these things to myself so that I can be okay with what I'm going through. You know, sometimes it is in life, and maybe repeated instances in life, you have done something kind of similar, where you have a conversation with yourself, and you do so not because you've lost your mind, but you're trying to keep your mind. And what you are doing is reminding yourself of things that you know to be true. You are telling yourself again things that you know to be true. This morning we're winding down a series on contentment that I've been calling the more of less. And today we want to think about the experience of trials in life. Now last week we talked about suffering. Today we're talking about trials. It's different. I mean, there are things that you go through in life that are trials that are not suffering, that are just the difficulty of life. And as a follower of Christ, to be able to be okay, to be able to be content in those trials, sometimes it is that we need to have a conversation and remind ourselves of some things that we know to be true. So that's the thing that we want to think about this morning. That's the question we want to see how God's Word answers, and that's this. What should I be telling myself as a follower of Jesus as I experience trials in life? Look with me in your Bibles today to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. We're just going to look at 3 verses here. James 1, starting with verse 2. James is speaking here and says to these believers, consider it a great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. I believe God used James then, and continues even today, to use what he has said here to help instruct us in the answer to that question. What are, as I'm going through the trials of life, what are some things as a follower of Jesus I need to be telling myself? Well, the first thing is I need to tell myself this: it's safer to learn in the current environment. It's safer to learn in the current environment. This passage comes to us and begins by saying, consider it a great joy, my brothers and sisters. You need to pay attention to the fact that he says specifically brothers and sisters. That means that this is not a statement that was just meant for general consumption, that these are instructions that are meant specifically for those that have made the decision to respond to God's offer of forgiveness and to become a follower of Jesus. So this is directed towards believers. And then he says to consider it a great joy. Now, consider is an accounting term. It's a word that's synonymous with reckon. And it's almost as if you're sitting there with a sheet of paper and you're deciding which category things go into. We're going to put this in the debit column. We're going to put this in the credit column. And so he's saying to put it in the credit column. Put it in as a positive, consider it, reckon it, classify it as joy, what? Whenever you experience various trials. Whenever you experience various trials. So, to believers, if you're one of those, this is a message to you. As you experience trials, you need to put them in a category. But before we get there, think with me again about this. Trials are different than suffering. Every experience of adversity in life doesn't fall into the category necessarily of suffering. For example, maybe it is that you're at work and you've got an ogre as a supervisor that is just for really no good reason at all, just kind of tightening the screws on you. Though that experience may be stressful, it may be worrisome, it's not actually suffering. All right, so what falls into trials? A whole lot of stuff. In fact, regularly we even use the phrase or the cliche, the trials of life. And who gets those? Everybody. Saved people? Yes. Non-believers? Yes. Christians? Yes. Non-Christians? Yes. Trials are experienced by everyone. And you need to remind yourself, as a follower of Jesus, just because you've made it a decision or made the commitment to follow Jesus, you're not exempted from this. In fact, pay attention to what it says. It says, whenever you experience various trials. The statement is not if you experience, it's when. It's not a question of if trials are going to come, even for you as a Christian, they're going to. And so he's saying whenever they come, whether that's now, whether that's this week, it's next month, it's next year, whenever they come, and whatever form they take, as you're sitting there in your mind categorizing these things, put this in the plus column. Well, that sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? I mean, that's kind of dumb, isn't it? Because is there anything that you have experienced that you would put into the trial category that you would say, man, that feels really good. Loved that. Loved those pressures at work. Loved that difficulty at school. Oh, that was just great. Why do they even have Carowinds? Why don't we get chewed out by a boss, right? But he's saying consider it, reckon it, put it in the category of positive, of being joyful. And think about it this way. If you're putting it in that category, what are you doing? You're saying that this is okay, and I am okay in this trial. How in the world is that possible? Is it that we're just supposed to say something that we don't think is true, but say it long enough so that people actually believe it? Right? Those are called campaign promises, right? Things that you know that aren't true, but if you repeat them long enough, they're believed. No, that's not what he's suggesting here. He's saying, tell yourself, reckon it, consider it, put it in the positive column as you experience these difficulties. But that doesn't mean that they're pleasant. It doesn't mean that they put a smile on your face. It doesn't mean that they feel good. So how in the world can we do this? Well, I think it has everything to do with the consideration of the word trial itself. Now, there's a number of ways in which we use that term. For example, we use it in a legal setting. And so in a criminal court case, how it works is that you have a defendant who has been charged by the state, who has been charged by the government with a particular crime. And so there is a trial, and the word means to prove, to verify. And so there is a trial that is conducted where there is testimony, there are witnesses, there are questions, there is examination, and the goal is to see whether or not the government can actually prove the allegation. Beyond a reasonable doubt, can you verify that the claim you made against this person is actually the case? So we use trial in that sense. You're seeking to prove that something is the case. But there's another way that we use the word trial, and a lot of times we're just thinking about it with respect to the whole experience of testing, or maybe even using the phrase running through the paces. For example, I was reading just the other week that the U.S. Navy has finally sent on its first deployment the newest, largest aircraft carrier that the world has ever seen. It's the USS Gerald Ford. It's impervious to attack except from golf balls. Remember any Gerald Ford stuff? Anyway, look it up. Anyway, the USS Gerald Ford is the largest aircraft carrier in the world. The next largest the next largest aircraft carrier is also a U.S. aircraft carrier. The number 3 is a Chinese carrier that was just launched, but this one displaces 12,000 more tons than the second largest. 30,000 more tons than the Chinese carrier. This thing is massive. And if you've got a ship that is this massive, that is that big, you also comes as no surprise, this thing came with a massive price tag. And so hanging off the side is a little tag, kind of like Minnie Pearl, it says $13.3 billion. Isn't that amazing? $13.3 billion. Now, that's not the airplanes on it. That's not paying the sailors on that boat. Just the boat itself, $13.3 billion. And this ship just completed its sea trials and is now on its first actual deployment. Well, when did its sea trials begin? Was that earlier in the summer? No, in 2019. Since 2019, they have taken this boat out repeatedly and been conducting these trials. Well, what are you doing when you are conducting a trial on a ship such as this? Well, you're testing everything, and you're exerting some stress on this structure, on this craft, on this equipment to see, is it going to work? And so we're going to veer hard to port at full speed, and we're going to try to launch an aircraft, and we're going to simulate a fire. So we're going to do all that at one time just to make sure that everything works. And what's the goal? Well, to identify if it works, if there is a problem, so that you can address the problem. But when do you conduct a trial? You conduct a trial before the enemy comes, right? Why are they putting this ship through its paces? They want to make sure that it can withstand these pressures, that it can endure these difficulties, that it can stand against this adversity before it's actually coming from the enemy. Now plug that back into what he's describing here. To those that are the followers of Jesus, it is not a matter of if, it's when trials come. Regular difficulty in life, and you're not immune from it, and sometimes it can be really great. And just as trials on a piece of equipment can be very significant and push you to the limits, it may very well be that the one that you're going through now, or the one that is going to come, or the one that came last year, it stressed you to the very max. You felt like you're almost at a breaking point, but that was experienced to do what? To put you through the paces before the enemy attack. Now understand this. As you experience a trial, whatever that difficulty is, there is none of this that has caught God by surprise. There is nothing that you are experiencing that hasn't crossed His desk and got His stamp of approval for you to experience. It's not that He's gone away and has no idea what's going on. He's on vacation. He's checked out. And so you're experiencing this and God doesn't know. God. Understand that the one who is in control is, for you, as one of His followers, many times even guiding you into these trials. And that doesn't mean that they're fun. Doesn't mean that they're not stressful. Doesn't mean that they don't really kind of put you to your limits. But that is to help identify weakness so that weakness can be addressed before the enemy comes. Let me just remind you, the enemy is coming. He's looking for you. He can't ultimately take you back into his grasp now that you've become a follower of Jesus, but he can make you ineffective. He can make you miserable. He can cause you to do damage to the team. He wants to do all of these things, and he's coming after you. And so the one who is in control of everything, who's in control of you, is going to allow you, maybe even guide you to experience the trials of life to prepare you for when the enemy comes. So what do you need to tell yourself? It is safer for me to learn in this environment. As great as the pressures are, as great as the stresses are, as frantic as this may be, as concerning as this may be, it's safer to learn in this environment than when I'm actually under assault from the enemy. I need to tell myself that. But I need to tell myself something else, and that's this. Building endurance has no shortcuts. Building endurance has no shortcuts. There's an important word that James uses in verse 3. He says, I want you to put this in the positive category, this experience of trials. He says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. You know this. You know this. This is not something that has to be imagined, that has to be contrived. You understand, you already are aware of this. Logic even tells you that testing produces endurance. That putting something through its paces identifies weakness so that weakness can be addressed, so that it becomes stronger, so that you can endure. The word that's translated as endure literally means to be steadfast, to be steadfast. For example, when I was in seminary, it was in the town of Wake Forest, and so my the first 2 years I lived in North Raleigh, and the first part of my second year, I was living with a coworker who lived in a mobile home in a trailer in North Raleigh. And there was nothing wrong with that until I think it was Hurricane Fran was coming through. And anyway, Raleigh was going to be affected by some fairly strong winds, and they were encouraging people, among other things, if you're not in something that's like made to the ground, you better do something about that. And so I left Raleigh. Why? Because I didn't know whether this that I was in might remain steadfast, whether it might be able to endure the difficulty that it was going to face. I didn't want it to blow around. I didn't want it to land on a witch. And so, he's saying, understand this, know this, the testing of your faith produces the ability to remain steadfast. So that as increasing amounts of adversity begins to be experienced, you're able to stay in place. You're not blown away by this. Experiencing the difficulties, the trials of life has as a benefit, it causes us to lean on God in such a way that the roots get established, so that even as the difficulty gets increased and as the adversity mounts up, our faith continues. We're not saying, I'm checking out of this. This whole following God thing, this is for the birds. No, I'm sticking with him. I'm seeing that he's enabling me somehow, some way to withstand this. That's his aim in leading you and guiding you, not around adversity, not around trials, but through them. The benefit is endurance. But the thing is this, in the absence of a trial, endurance never shows up. In the absence of a trial, you never build the ability to withstand. Endurance never increases. In fact, in the absence of a trial, endurance decreases. It's very much like the cliche, use it or lose it. And in the absence of trial, we tend to get weaker. So, to put it in this context, our house is a mile and a half away, which is not that far. And there are instances, and I'm not saying repeated because, I hate to show off, but there are some instances where I have walked home, right? And I don't really know why I did that, but anyway, I've walked. It's not that far. It's not that far. And so I could walk to the house, and if I wanted to walk home to eat lunch, or if I want to then walk back, I can do that. Now, suppose I get a phone call, and Caroline says, hey, one of the kids is having some episode. We've had to call an ambulance. They're in trouble. I need you to get here as quick as you can. Let's say my car won't start, and if I have to run to the house, I could get there. But at that point, we would need 2 ambulances. Why? Because I haven't been running. And it takes running to get to the point where you can run further and further and further distances. If you want to run a marathon, you don't start by running 26.2 miles, do you? You start by getting a mile under your belt without needing oxygen. And then you stretch that out. And before you ever run a full marathon, you're probably going to run a half marathon. Why? Because you're seeking to build endurance, your ability to withstand this pressure. And understand that only comes as you are stretching things, as you are being pressed, as you are being put through the paces. But here's the reality. We don't like that. In fact, constantly as people, what are we doing? We're looking for shortcuts, right? I mean, with respect to our weight, we want to weigh less. And so what we like to do, we'd like to go to the doctor and say, Doctor, I want to lose some weight. Can you give me a pill that will cause me to lose weight while I still belly up to a fountain of gravy biscuits? That's what we want. And what's the doctor going to say? That weight loss ultimately comes from what? Diet and exercise. You know what? You know that. You know that. You may not like it, you may not want it, but you know this is how it comes. I've been playing the banjo now for like 4 years, and I'm not great by any stretch, but I'm a lot better than I was, and I'd like to be a lot better than I am, and I wish there was some magic wand that could cause that to be the case, but you know how I get to be a better player? Practice. Put yourself through the paces, and what does that do? It produces this. It's not magic. It's you practice, you get better. You watch your diet and exercise, you'll be at or get to a controlled, decent, and healthy weight. You know that. You know that. And he's saying here, you know that your faith only grows, that your dependence on God only grows and gets to the point where it can withstand the difficulties, not just of life, but even the attacks of the enemy as you experience trials. Does that mean that we need to be crazy and say dumb stuff like, ooh, trials are fun. Yay. That's terrible. Hot dog. No. But that I can put it in the positive category as I'm telling myself this. It is safer to learn in this environment, going through this trial, than when the enemy attacks. That my faith is only going, my dependence on God is only going to grow as it gets stretched, as it gets some pushback, as it gets pushed to the limits. That's the only way that it's going to get stronger. So maybe it's not so bad after all. Maybe it is that I can be okay as I'm going through that. What's that? That's contentment. I can be okay even going through the trials of life as a follower of Jesus because I'm telling myself what I know to be true. You are, some of you, in this moment. And whatever you're going through in life, you're experiencing some varied number of trials. If you're not, if everything has been going fine lately, it's getting ready, likely, to change because trials are going to come. those outside a relationship with Christ, there's no help. There just isn't. But for you, for one who's a follower of Christ, help is not only available, but he is using this for good purposes in your life. So maybe, just maybe, instead of praying to get out of it, you just say, Lord, help me to grow as I lean on you to get through it. Will you bow your heads with me?